Here's something I need to say clearly. Somatic work needs to come out of the therapy room and into the coaching room. And I don't mean that lightly. Look, we're living through unprecedented change right now. Technology, AI, social media, the speed of societal shifts, geopolitical upheaval. The world has genuinely been turned on its head. And the leaders navigating all of this, well, they're not broken, they don't need fixing, but they're certainly struggling. And I'm seeing it more and more. My name's Andre Dukmin, and for the last 25 years I've been both a clinician and for the last 10 years an executive coach. I can tell you that executives are showing up overwhelmed and anxious, operating under chronic pressure. And here's what's happening. Most coaches have been trained in traditional coaching frameworks, goal setting, accountability and mindset work. And of course these are brilliant tools. But when an executive's nervous system is completely dysregulated, those tools just don't work. And on the other side, you've got somatic practitioners and therapists who understand nervous system regulation beautifully. They can work with trauma, with dysregulation, really working with the body, but they often lack the coaching framework, the present moment, future-focused methodology that executives really need. So coaches end up feeling helpless with some of their most important clients, while somatic practitioners stay in the therapy room when actually some of their skills are desperately needed in the coaching world. So what if there was a way to bridge both? To bring nervous system regulation into executive coaching in a way that's professional, evidence-based, and stays clearly in the coaching domain. So that's what this video series is about. Let me show you what I've discovered, and let me tell you how I discovered this integration. So, as I said, I've been an osteopath since 2001. And then over the next few years, I continued my professional training to include coaching and several somatic modalities. By 2015, I was working as a therapist using nervous system regulation techniques in my health practice, working with trauma, with chronic stress, people with health issues, whether they're mental, emotional, or physical, or a combination of all of them. But I'd also trained as a coach back in 2008, and I'd started a small coaching practice on the side of my other business. At first, I kept these two worlds completely separate. Osteopathy and therapy over there, coaching over here. But then slowly the world started to collide. Around 2018, I started getting leaders coming to see me who were struggling with burnout and chronic stress. And I realised very quickly that a combination of my nervous system regulation tools and my coaching skills was the most effective way to work with these people. I developed what I call the -5 to +5 scale, a spectrum from dysregulation at the -5 through regulation at 0 and then peak performance at +5. I started introducing concepts from psychological flexibility frameworks such as acceptance and commitment coaching into my practice. And I was mapping out what I call the 3 systems: the survival system, the feeling system and the thinking system. And then post-COVID, something happened. I was sitting at my desk working on these 3 systems when I picked up my old notes from my training in acceptance and commitment coaching. And there were 3 core principles staring back at me. Be present, open up, do what matters. And suddenly I saw it. These systems mapped perfectly onto the other systems that I was already using. The survival system was all about being present. The feeling system, opening up to emotions. And the thinking system, taking action and doing what matters. I couldn't believe it. I was stunned. Here was a traditional coaching framework with the principles that I've been studying for years, and they aligned beautifully with the science-based nervous system work I've been doing for 2 decades. It merged the 2 worlds together, somatic neuroscience and coaching methodology, into one integrated framework. And that became the backbone of everything I now teach in the Embodied Performance System. So let me show you why this integration matters with a real example. A few years ago, a CFO, let's call her Katie, came into my practice. She was completely overwhelmed in the first session. She was really anxious. She cried multiple times during that first meeting. She was struggling to breathe. She literally couldn't catch her breath at certain points. Now, if I'd only had traditional coaching training, I might have tried to use cognitive tools with her, maybe some goal setting or some reframing, maybe looking at values, but Katie was incapable of working at a balanced cognitive and emotional level on that session. Her nervous system was completely dysregulated. Her window of tolerance had shrunk down to almost nothing. She was in survival mode. So traditional coaching tools really wouldn't have helped. They'd probably have been ineffective, and they would have maybe even been useless, potentially even harmful, making her feel like she was failing at coaching as well. So here's what I did instead. For the first 2 sessions, we only talked about nervous system regulation. I said to her, Katie, first of all, this isn't your fault. Your window of tolerance has shrunk due to high and chronic stress from a hectic workload. We need to widen your window first before we do any traditional coaching, and then we need to help you get your nervous system back into sync. And that language alone, this isn't your fault, took away some of the guilt and shame she'd been carrying. She recognised that maybe she wasn't broken, she wasn't weak, she hadn't failed at anything. Her nervous system was just out of balance from a combination of things going on in her life, and in particularly her work. So we focused entirely on the survival system, connecting her to her breath, doing some grounding techniques, helping her nervous system feel safe enough to come out of that constant threat mode. It was only about the 3rd or 4th session, once she'd had some regulation tools and that she was using these tools between sessions to help her sort of calm herself naturally. Only then, once her window of tolerance had started to widen a little bit, then we started to do some values work and planning some powerful actions that she could take to move herself forward. And over about 3 to 4 months, Katie did come back from the precipice. In fact, she eventually chose to leave that toxic work environment, but she did it from a place of clarity and feeling empowered rather than just in a reactive sort of overwhelmed choice. And that's what makes this integration more possible. Nervous system regulation gave her the foundation, and then the coaching framework we had in place gave her the direction. Without both, she'd still be stuck. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. If I'm working with nervous system regulation, aren't I just stepping into therapy? Yeah, sure, this is a really important distinction. So let's make it clear. If a client wants to work on stuff that happened in the past, such as trauma, childhood issues, maybe some sort of terrible family stories, then sure, of course, that's therapy. And that's definitely not your role as a coach. But if a coaching client wants help to feel less frazzled and anxious right here in the moment, to have a little bit more clarity and a bit more focus, to perform better under the pressures, well, that's absolutely coaching. And nervous system regulation helps hugely with that. The key is this. As coaches, we're present moment and future focused. We're not excavating the past. We're building capacity for what's ahead. Now, my understanding of working in the boundary between coaching and therapy, after working with a mental health charity for many years as a therapist and also with my own private practice and coaching executives for well over 10 years, the line's pretty clear. If it's past focused work, that's more in the line of therapy. But if we're keeping it present and future focused, then that's very much around coaching. And nervous system regulation, when used in the service of present moment awareness and future performance, is absolutely a coaching tool. In fact, from my mind, it's becoming an essential coaching tool because these high performers aren't broken. They don't need fixing. They just need to find a way to deal with a massive change that's happening around them. And that's exactly what the Embodied Performance System does. When you integrate nervous system regulation with traditional coaching frameworks, everything becomes possible. You can work with any client anywhere on the spectrum from -5 to +5. You can work with a high performer already at the top of her game. She can still use breath work and somatic grounding to give her even more presence, to give her even more clarity under pressure. Or a struggling CEO operating at -4 on the scale, who's burnt out, who's overwhelmed, who's barely functional. You can use emotional processing tools to help him deal with his emotions, to help him feel more fully and regulate his system more fully. And then you can move forward with values and action and all those sort of great bits and pieces. You're not limited to only working with already stable clients. You're not limited to only helping with peak performance optimization. You can then have the complete toolkit from -5, as Katie was in my story before, burnt out and completely dysregulated, through to 0, where there's much more regulation and balance in the system, and all the way to +5, peak performance. And here's the beautiful part. Nervous system regulation is a tool that every single person can use. It gives them more grounding, more presence, helps them deal with stress more easily. It's a game changer wherever you are on the performance spectrum. But once they have those regulation tools, they still obviously need to deal with emotional issues and cognitive challenges. They still need direction. They still need values, clarity, committed action, all of the good stuff. And that's where traditional coaching and stuff like psychological flexibility comes into their own. And then when you get to combine the two, the somatic regulation and the coaching framework, you have a whole new methodology. Not somatic work alone, not traditional coaching alone, integration. And now here's why this framework works so powerfully, especially with analytical executives. I can promise you, clients love seeing the science behind why they're using certain tools. When you can explain to an executive, look, your nervous system is in fight or flight right now, and that's why your thinking brain feels offline. That's your prefrontal cortex shutting down to prioritize survival. After all, you don't need to think when you're running away from a bear. You just need to run. So your body prioritizes blood to your legs and arms, not to your brain. So we're going to use this breathwork technique to activate your vagus nerve and signal safety to your autonomic nervous system. Now that's not just feel-good language, that's translating coaching into evidence-based methodology. And it's my experience that executives, especially the more skeptical and analytical ones, buy in completely when they understand the mechanism. Now I've worked with more than 4,000 individuals. I've run more than 35,000 clinical sessions of osteopathy and therapy, and more than 2,500 sessions of coaching. And what you learn after that volume of work is pattern recognition. You start seeing the same nervous system responses across different people. You start recognizing what works and what doesn't. You start joining the patterns together, and eventually you create new patterns, as I've done with the Embodied Performance System that I teach to coaches. Now that depth of experience isn't something I'm saying just to impress you. It is the reality. When you sat with that many dysregulated nervous systems over 25 years, you learn what actually does create regulation. And when you've coached that many executives, you learn what actually creates performance, peak performance. And what I've learned over those last couple of decades is that actually you need both. You need regulation and performance, somatic and cognitive, nervous system tools and a coaching framework. That's the integration. So over the next 3 videos, I'm going to show you exactly how this integration works. Part 2 will dive deep into the survival system and how be present in our bodies creates the foundation that everything else is built on. We'll explore nervous system regulation, touch a little bit on polyvagal theory, some somatic grounding work, all the tools that we can use when an executive is in survival mode and that their thinking and feeling systems are completely off balance. Part 3 will explore the feeling system and how open up to what's going on in our emotional world transforms how we might work with emotions in coaching. Not just cognitively processing emotions, but actually feeling them into the body, locating them in the body, accepting their presence and using emotional processing as a regulation tool. Part 4 will complete the picture with the thinking system and doing what matters, showing you how cognitive coaching tools, being really clear around your values and taking powerful action, work brilliantly once the nervous system has the capacity to do this work. This is where peak performance becomes possible. And by the end of this series, you'll see how to work with any client anywhere on the spectrum, from the burned out CEO at -5 who can barely function, all the way to the high performer at +3 who wants to optimize even further. You'll understand when to use bottom-up regulation through the body and when to use top-down cognitive tools. And then you'll work out how to assess which system is most accessible in any given moment. This is the Embodied Performance System. 3 systems integrated with psychological flexibility principles. Let's dive in.